So far in the class, we've talked about zombies and we've talked about the undead and we talked about Frankenstein quite a bit. And this week, we're talking about monsters, if they can be called monsters, that are quite a bit different from the zombies or from the artificial creation of life. And those monsters are, of course, snakes. Now, the reason why I say if we can consider them monsters is because snakes are quite realistic. And there are huge snakes, and then there are urban legends about snakes, and there are myths about snakes, and there are just snakes. So how do we separate the myth from the reality? And as I say in the PowerPoint, and I'm going to reiterate probably quite a bit of what I wrote in that PowerPoint, is that we fear snakes for the same yet different reasons for why we fear zombies and other creatures such as vampires, etc. We fear snakes because there is something real to fear. They bite, they have poison, you die. And if they don't bite you and poison you, well, then they can wrap around you, coil around you, and kill you that way too. So sometimes they have you coming and going. But the story or the image of the snake got blown much more out of proportion than what real snakes are able to offer in the way of fear. And so that's how it's different, that they are real, but how it is the same is they are bringers of death. Just like the zombie, just like Frankenstein's creature, just like vampires, if you mess around with a snake, then very likely you are going to die. And in the ancient world, that was probably even more true than it is in the modern world where we have anti-venoms and so on and so on. But the thing is about the snake, it has not always been considered a monster. And if you go back to the earliest recorded myth, it was a monster. And of course that is Apep, also known as Apophis in Egyptian myth. And he lives in the underworld. And I shouldn't say the underworld because the Egyptian afterlife was not in the center of the earth, as were other mythic places of the dead. It was out to the west. But at any rate, Apep, which is the Greek name, Apophis is the Greek name. Apep lived in the underworld. And every night, Ra would sail his sailor barge into, and I'm still saying it, into Tuat. How's that? That's the name of the Egyptian afterlife. Ra would sail his barge in there, and he would have to fight all sorts of demons, and one of the demons was Apep or Apophis. And every night, the snake would be killed, and Ra would emerge out the other side of Tuat in the morning, and it was a cycle that would go on and on and on. And so that first instance in that recorded myth, the snake was a monster. Now, in Sumerian myth, it's really interesting. And when I talk about snakes, it's just not the serpent, but I include dragons in that. And also sea monsters such as the Leviathan in Hebrew scripture. But in Sumerian myth, you had Tiamat. And she was, well, you didn't specifically have her, and she was an early Magna Mater, or the progenitor of all of the deities. And it's interesting about Tiamat because she was seen as a large sea monster type of creature. And she actually saved her children because her husband, whose name escapes me at the moment, wanted to kill all of their children because they kept him awake. And she wouldn't allow that and even helped her children to kill him and remove that danger. But then later in history, Marduk, who would have been probably her grandson, rose up against her and killed her. and she's described as being bloated and huge and all sorts of unsavory adjectives. So why? Well, it probably was a shift, probably chronicling a mythic shift, or the myth was chronicling a historical shift from a matriarchal or matrifocal society into a patriarchal or patrifocal society. Now, of course, we can't prove this, but you have the old Magna Mater, the mother of the deities, slain by one of her offsprings. And then in Greek myth, there are loads and loads and loads of snakes, and some of them are monsters and some of them aren't. But the fight between a human and a snake and a deity and a snake are found in many, many, many mythos, as seen in Egypt and Sumeria, and then, of course, again in Greece, as I cover in the PowerPoint, when Apollo kills the python. Now, Apollo kills the python, which is sacred to the seer or the oracle of Delphi, because when Apollo's mother was pregnant with him and Artemis, the python would not let her rest in order to give birth to her children. And so Apollo hated the python for that reason. And the reason why the python did that was because of Hera. Hera was very insanely jealous that her husband Zeus had yet again impregnated another female. But when he killed the python, he had to make restitution to the oracle. And strangely enough, part of that restitution included him becoming the main deity of Delphi. So again, probably shows a shift from a woman-centered culture, or at least partly woman-centered, into a male-centered culture. Of course, we all know the story of the Hebrew scripture about the serpent in the garden, and I'm sure that you saw the picture in the PowerPoints of where the serpent is portrayed as being female. There, and I'm not going to belabor that because I did in the PowerPoint and talked about how that serpent and then the serpent Ophion in Pelasgian myth, which is pre-Greek, is quite a bit alike, where Ophion brags that he alone created the universe, and your enemy gets pretty upset with him and bruises his head with her heel and sends him to the underworld, which is what Yahweh tells the serpent in the Hebrew scriptures is what's going to happen to him. And I'm going to stop there and come back to the association of females and serpents in just a minute.